Welcome back. This is part 2 of Module 6, Qualitative Adaptations in Word Reading, and today we're going to be talking about practice. So in this part, you're going to be learning what effective practice looks like when we're talking about intensive reading interventions, and also how to adapt reading instruction to improve student practice. So like we did with modeling, we're going to be thinking about what are the criteria that we're looking for when we're talking about practice in word reading, and so that we can understand whether or not lessons or examples of instruction include these features, and if not, how do we adapt or build in more of these features of effective practice in our instruction and intervention. So we're going to be thinking about our model of explicit instruction for practice. And again, last time we talked about modeling. This time we're going to be talking about practice. And so when we talk about practice, we have guided practice and independent practice. And guided practice sometimes we talk about as the we do component, and independent practice is the you do component. For this part, we're really going to be focusing on guided practice because this is really the sort of the heart of what we're trying to do with explicit instruction, particularly in teaching word reading. So we'll be talking some about independent practice, but mostly about the features of what good guided practice looks like. One of the things I like to think about when we talk about we do is sometimes we get this idea that we do is when the teacher and the student are doing exactly the same thing at the same time. We'll read this word together. And I like to think of it more as guided practice, and we do is we're going to be practicing this together. You're going to be practicing, and I'm going to be giving you guidance and feedback along all of the steps. So it's not just that we're doing it at the same time, but the practice, the whole part of the practice is going to be happening together with both the teacher and the student. So why are we learning this? Why are we talking about practice? And I think, it's pretty clear that when we talk about practice, and especially guided practice, this is really the first time that students are able to demonstrate this new skill or strategy that they've learned. And it's our opportunity to really guide them through this practicing in an immediate way with a lot of feedback and setting up these practice experiences so students will be successful. So it really is the sort of crux of this kind of initial teaching process. And as you'll see in word reading instruction, code-based instruction that talks about things like phonemic awareness and decoding and fluency, that this kind of initial practice opportunities are really key when we're learning the skills associated with word reading. So one of the ways to kind of think about this is when we think about explicit instruction, we might have, this is an explicit instruction lesson in any area. It could be in, learning a writing strategy or comprehension or math problem solving. And we might have a typical lesson time frame of 30 minutes. And during that 30 minutes, we can think about that there's going to be a modeling component and that there's also going to be a practice component. And maybe that practice component consists of some guided practice and some independent practice. And we feel pretty, this is pretty kind of typical way we think about how you might sort of divide up 30 minutes of an explicit instruction lesson. We also feel pretty comfortable that this could change too, right? So we may have less modeling depending on what the lesson format is and where occurs on the kind of scope and sequence. And we might have more practice, and maybe that practice is sort of less guided practice and more independent practice. So we're pretty kind of comfortable with this kind of progression through a lesson in, say, 30 minutes. But when we're talking about explicit instruction and word reading, sometimes this looks kind of different than what we typically think about. So we might have first a lesson time frame that's much shorter. So maybe we're only talking about 10 or 15 minutes for a lesson in word reading. And during that time frame, we may again talk about this kind of cycle between modeling and practice. But it may only take about 30 seconds to kind of cycle through this modeling and practice opportunity in an instructional sequence. So this is much shorter. And then when we think about over the course of the 10 or 15 minutes, we may have these kind of cycles of modeling and practice throughout the whole time. Right? So this looks a little bit different. It's not just front-loading with modeling and then having practice at the end. It's this really kind of cycle of modeling and practice throughout the course of the whole lesson. And this is a little bit different when we're talking about word reading. So for example, if I was kind of going to lead you through an instructional sequence of modeling and practicing how to decode this word mud, you'll see that while I go through this, it's going to take a short amount of time, and we're going to go through this kind of modeling and practice cycle. So I'm actually going to time this on my phone, and we'll see how long this actually takes. All right, start. All right, so my turn. Watch me read this word. I'll touch each letter and say its sound. I won't stop between the sounds. Mud. Now I'll say it fast. Mud. This word is mud. Okay, now it's your turn to read this word. I'm going to touch under each letter, and you say its sound. Don't stop between the sounds. Okay, ready, everyone? Say the sounds. Okay, say it fast. That's right, mud. You read the word mud. Okay, now it's your turn to read a new word. I'll touch each letter, and you say its sound. Don't stop between the sounds. Okay, everyone ready? Say the sounds. Okay, say it fast. That's right, fin. You read the word fin. Okay, I'm stopping my watch, and you can see maybe that it says just about a minute. So we went through this kind of sequence, instructional sequence, in a minute. And when you think about it, let's see what we have here. Like, I started off by modeling. So this was my turn. I modeled, and I said, watch me read this word. I'll touch under each letter. Now I'll say it fast. Then I went right to giving students a turn. Now it's your turn to read this word. And now the practice opportunity here was for the same word that I had read the first time, so it was mud. And then we actually went on to another practice opportunity, this time with a new word. And this is this part right here. So this was another practice opportunity on reading the word fin, which was a new word than we had before. So think about that. This is a sort of model, and then one kind of guided practice, which is actually practicing the same skill that I modeled the first time, and then a little bit different kind of practice where we had practice reading a new word using the same skill or strategy. And all that took place in really 60 seconds. So we kind of cycled through this model guided practice sequence in a very short amount of time. And that's generally what you think of when we think about word reading instruction. Okay, so we're talking about how the cycle and the sequence of modeling and practice, and particularly guided practice when we're in word reading instruction, really looks different than it does in other kinds of lesson. That we have this really kind of quick recursive cycle of modeling and practice and modeling and practice. So when we think about our lesson time frame again, which is pretty short, maybe 15 minutes, oftentimes in a word reading lesson you might see a number of different kind of areas addressed. So we might have phonemic awareness, we might have letter sound instruction and practice, we might have word reading instruction and practice, and then we might have dictation, which could be spelling or dictation of letters. In a little bit different kind of a more advanced kind of phonics lesson or word reading lesson, we might have an introduction in teaching of letter combinations, we might have word reading, we might have sentence reading, or for more advanced word reading, we might have a section on word parts, polysyllabic word reading, and then paragraph reading. So again, we're covering a lot of ground in a sort of short lesson time frame, maybe 15 minutes. And throughout all of these, we're going to see this kind of cycle of modeling and practice, modeling and practice. So there isn't going to be the same kind of distinction between here's the modeling part and here's the practice part. It's going to cycle through. So I think that's an important thing to remember and think about when we're talking about these kinds of skills that go along with things, components of word reading. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what effective guided practice looks like. So we can think about these features of what we're looking for when we're either evaluating or developing or designing effective guided practice. So first we want to think about that the guided practice focuses on the same singular objective that was introduced during the modeling and teaching component. And we also want to be giving students practice on the same kind of examples that we also taught and modeled, right? That makes sense. We also want to be guiding students through the skill and strategy kind of step by step. So not just sort of handing it over to them, but this is the whole idea of the guiding part of guided practice. We're going to do this together. We're going to go through it part by part, component by component to give you practice on each of the components of the new skill or strategy. We also want to provide just the just right amount of guidance. So we really kind of have to adjust our practice based on where students are, right? Is this something brand new? Is this something that they've already learned part of before? Is this the sort of third day we're working on it? Are these really hard new skills? So we have to kind of always be adjusting the amount of practice based on where students are, and making sure that the kind of practice and the guidance and the level of practice is at a just right spot for where students are. And finally, we want to think about providing clear prompts and supports during the practice component of our explicit instruction routine. So we want to prompt students to go through and practice the steps, and we want to build in support so that they'll be successful during these kind of initial stages of guided practice. So we're going to go through each of these features, and I'm going to give you some examples and non-examples of what this might look like in different types of word reading lessons. So the first component is focusing on the same singular objective and using similar examples. So here's a first example. We might be focusing a lesson on listening for first sounds. So today we are going to listen for first sounds in words. And it's going to start with a modeling. So it's my turn first. So the first sound in sit is s. Everyone, what's the first sound in sit? And here you actually see that there's a kind of initial practice right in the modeling component. So there's a practice right away. But then we come to your turn, more guided practice. So now it's your turn. So what's the first sound in this word? What's the first sound in mud? And of course, the first sound in mud is mm. So we're looking to see if there's the same singular objective. So what I modeled was saying the first sound in sit, and the first sound in sit is s. And then for the guided practice, we're asking what's the first sound in mud, which is asking to do the same objective and using the same kind of example that we used in the modeling. So this seems pretty straightforward. We're practicing the same thing that we're modeling and teaching. So this would meet the criteria of focusing on the same singular objective. So now look at some different examples and see whether or not we think these are also focusing on same singular objective or not. So same thing, today we're going to listen for first sound in words, and it's my turn. The first sound in sit is s. Everyone, what's the first sound in sit? That's right, s is the first sound in sit. Okay, let's do some practice. Your turn. What's the first sound in popcorn? All right, think for a minute. Do you think this is the same singular objective? So one of the things that might be different about this is the example that we've selected. So we don't know for sure, but it looks like the example that we modeled was a short one-syllable word, sit, and also a word that begins with a continuous sound that you can hold out, right? S. So popcorn has two syllables, and it actually starts with a stop sound, p, which is a little bit harder to hold out. So we're not sure about this, right? This could be asking students to do something for practice that we didn't really model during the teaching component. So this may not meet this criteria. How about this? What word starts with the same sound as man? So think about that for a second. Okay, so we're really thinking about kind of the first sound, right? Because we have to think about other words that start with the same sound as man. But when you think about it, it's still talking about first sounds, but it's really a different objective or a different skill that we're asking the students to do, right? So we modeled saying the first sound in sit is s. So listening to a word and saying the first sound. For this one, we're asking them to do something different, which is come up with a new word that starts with the same sound as man. So it's kind of subtle, right? But it's really asking students to practice with something that they haven't been taught or that we haven't modeled first. So again, this wouldn't meet the criteria of focusing on the same singular objective. What does nap begin with? So you might be starting to see a pattern here that these are pretty much all non-examples. So what's different about this one is we're actually using different wording than we did during the modeling. So during the modeling, we're saying, what's the first sound in the word? And here we say, what does nap begin with? And for lots of students, they'd get it, right? We're doing first sounds, so nap begins with n. But at the same time, as you could interpret that as sort of saying, well, nap begins with n. And that would be another answer that would fit that. So this kind of goes along with the kind of clear, consistent wording that we talked about in modeling. So we're sort of using different wording to kind of for the practice opportunity than we did in the modeled example. So again, this might be not meeting the criteria. Or how about this one? Let's choose a picture that starts with S. So again, we're focusing on first sound, but this is a different task. Now we're asking kids to pick pictures that start with the first sound of S. So there's a couple of different things that they have to do in between. So the idea here is that these don't focus on the same singular objective. So the idea here is we really want to initial practice to be mirroring exactly what we modeled and taught during the modeling stage. And one of the things about some of these examples here is these could turn out to be really good activities for practicing first sound. But if we're going to have them practice these activities, we would want to make sure that we teach and model the procedure for these activities just like we would anything else. So we can't kind of jump to practice opportunities if we're not modeling exactly what we're asking kids to do. So really the only thing here that's the same singular objective in the true sense is asking kids a question like, what's the first sound in mud? Because it's the same wording, it's asking them to do the same skill. And when we think about this, it kind of comes back to our idea that when we're coming up with a learning goal, that we really want to be specific in how we think about what that learning goal is, what the singular objective is, by thinking about both what the behavior is and what the skill is. So really what we're doing in that last one is asking, and the goal or the objective is that students will demonstrate phoneme isolation, right, isolating the first sound in a word, by saying the first sound in a one-syllable word presented orally. And we're also going to say that these one-syllable words are going to begin with a continuous sound. Right? So if we're really clear and specific about the learning goal or objective, that makes it easier for us to develop practice opportunities that focus on that same singular objective. Okay, so our next feature of effective practice and effective guided practice is guiding students through the skills and strategy. So that's making sure that we're guiding them through the components of the skill during practice, similar to what we modeled. Okay, so let's do this as an example. So my turn. I'm going to show you how to read words with our new sound EA. Remember, EA usually says E. So I'll read the first two. First I'll say each sound and then I'll read the word. So in the first word, eat, eat. Okay, and the next sound is eel, real. Okay, good. Now it's your turn. Your turn to read the next two words. Okay, ready? What word? Okay, what word? All right, think about that for a second. Am I meeting this criteria of guiding students through the skill and strategy? So the answer here is no. So when we think about it, I'm going through each step when I'm modeling, but then when I go to the practice opportunity during the your turn, I'm sort of skipping the steps and I'm combining the steps that I modeled. So I modeled going through and saying each sound and then reading the word. But then when we switched to practice, I said, now it's your turn to read the word and just go ahead and read the word. So an example that would make it so that we're guiding students through the skill and strategy would be more like this. I'll show you how to read words with our new sound E. Remember, EA usually says E. I'll read the first two. I'll say each sound and then I'll read the word. Okay? Eat, eat. Real, real. Okay, now it's your turn to read the next two words. You'll say each sound and then you'll read the word. Okay, ready? Say each sound. Say the whole thing. That's right. You read the word meat. Okay, and then we would go through the next one. So there's kind of a subtle difference there, but what we're trying to do is make sure that the practice opportunity really goes through each of the steps that were modeled, and that we're not skipping steps or combining steps. So now this one meets the criteria of guiding students through the skill and strategy. Okay, let's try another one. This is an example that focuses on strategy for reading polysyllabic words. So my turn. I'll circle the parts at the beginning and end of this word. Then I'll read the parts and then I'll read the word. So first I'm going to look for parts at the beginning of the word. All right, so I see a part that we've learned. and that's re, so I'll circle it. Now, I actually see another part at the beginning of this word that we learned, and that's con, so I'll look at that. I'll circle that too. Now I'm going to look for parts at the end of the word, and I see one. Here's a part that we learned, that's shun. Okay, so I've circled the parts at the beginning and the end of this word, and now I'm going to read the parts. Re, con, struck, shun. Okay, now I'm going to read the whole word. Reconstruction. Okay, so that was my turn. Now it's your turn. So just like I did, I want you to circle the parts at the beginning and the end of this word. Then I want you to read the parts and then read the word. Okay, so think for a minute and see if you think this is guiding students through the skill and strategy, or skill or strategy. So what do you think? Is this a positive example of this, or are there some things that might be problematic about this? All right, X. So there are some places here where we probably didn't guide students through the skill and strategy the way that we would want to during an initial guided practice. So when you think about it, that there's more parts here than just this sentence, right? So there's a number of different things. There's circle the parts at the beginning, there's circle the parts at the end, there's reading the parts and then reading the word. So for guided practice, we probably want to guide students through each of these parts of the strategy. So we might sort of say, okay, now it's your turn to read this long word. So the first thing we do is circle parts at the beginning of the word. Okay, everyone, see if you can find parts at the beginning of this word and circle them. All right, did you circle the parts? Did you find re? So again, I'm sort of giving them a chance to go through the steps of the strategy. So then the second part would be, all right, everyone, the next thing we do is circle parts at the end of the word. So let's look at this word and see if you can circle any parts at the end of this word. Okay, everyone, did you circle ing? That's one of the parts we know, so you should have circled it. Okay, now I want you to read each part. I'll point to the part and you read the part. Ready? Re, turn, ing. Okay, let's read the whole word. Read it. That's right. This long word is returning. So the difference here is that this is a strategy or a skill that has multiple parts. So instead of assuming that students can kind of go through the parts on their own, during initial guided practice, we're giving them practice doing each one of the parts part by part. Okay, we talked about focusing on the same singular objective. We talked about guiding students through the skill and strategy. Now we're going to talk about providing the just right amount of guidance, and that doing this based on our understanding of where students are, what students' skills are. So this is the hard part, right? This is really kind of knowing how much guidance is necessary so that it's right at the exact level where students are. And so, you know, we know that we want to provide this right amount of guidance, and we're going to think about kind of how much modeling do we want to do and how much practice do we want to do. And so how do we kind of design this modeling and practice loop so that we're giving just the right amount of guidance for where students are? All right, so one of the things that we could do is we could think about kind of how we cycle through the modeling practice loop based on where students are and how new the skill is or how difficult the skill is. So at the very initial stages of learning, we might be sort of cycling through modeling and practice in a very kind of tight loop. So we might say, my turn to read a word. When I touch a letter, I'll say its sound. I'll keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. Right? So I might say, here I go, mud. This word is mud. Now it's your turn to read the same word. When I touch under a letter, you'll say its sound. Keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. Okay, say it fast. Mud. That's right. That word is mud. So in here, we see that for every word, we're just going quickly that I'm going to model it, and then I'm going to give students practice with the exact same word. So it's just going to go like that for every word. We're going to kind of go through the my turn, your turn, modeling practice with every word in a very quick cycle. And then we'd go through the same thing. So I would model the word fin and then give the students turn to practice the word fin. So then we could also move towards having a little bit less guidance and less scaffolding by starting with modeling and then moving towards practice. So this might be that I would model a few examples. So I would say it would be my turn to read this word. When I touch a letter, I'll say its sound. I'll keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. And then I would give the student a turn reading the same word, right? So this would be the modeling piece. And then I might go through and sort of do I'll model it and then give the student a turn on the same word one more time. But then I might move to practice, where in this case, it goes to your turn to read some new words. When I touch a letter, you'll say its sound. Keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. So here are 3 new words that I didn't model, but sort of I've modeled 2 and given students practice on the same one. And then we're moving to these 3 words where I'm not going to model these words. Students are just going to practice it using the same strategy, right? So this is a kind of like starting with modeling and then moving more towards practice. Later on, we might even sort of adjust that so the modeling is even quicker and the practice is more extensive. So it might be my turn to read a word. When I touch under a letter, I'll say its sound. I'll keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. And so I might do this really quickly. Mud. The word is mud. Okay. Now it's your turn to practice reading some new words. When I touch under a letter, you'll say its sound. So for that one, I just did a really quick model of one word and moved right into providing practice opportunities for students. Right, so you can see how we're sort of changing from how the modeling and practice are related to each other. Are we modeling and practicing every word together? Am I modeling like some of the words with student practicing and then giving them new words? Or am I modeling very quickly just one word and moving into practice? We also probably would get to the point where we're going to not do any modeling at all. We're just going to go right to practice. And this might look something like you already know how to read words that begin with a long sound. So remember, when I touch a letter, you'll say its sound. Keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. Right, so here I didn't model at all, but that's because I have an understanding of where students are, and I know that we've done this before, and I've provided a lot of modeling. And at this point, they should know how to do this. So we're moving right to the practice without doing any modeling. So you can sort of see that there's this sort of sequence of how much modeling, how much practice, how much modeling and practice are we integrating together, and we're adjusting that kind of probably over the course of multiple lessons, really based on student mastery and student understanding of these kind of skills. So this is hard to do, right? Because we really have to have an understanding of what students know and how much support and guidance they need to be successful, right? And so we should be doing this so that it's guaranteeing and maximizing student success. So students should be successful at each of these levels because we understand the just right amount of guidance that they need. So we could also think about how practice might change over time based on students' understanding or development along a continuum of a skill. So this is an example of how the practice of the strategy for reading a word might change over time based on students learning and becoming more familiar with the skill. Right? So it might start with, okay, it's your turn. You're going to read this word. When I touch a letter, you'll say its sound. Keep saying the sound until I touch under the next letter. Right? So this is what we've just been doing. So it would be flash. Okay, what's the word? Flash. Then it might turn to, you're going to read this word without saying the sounds out loud. When I touch a letter, sound out this word to yourself. So now, instead of students saying it out loud, I'm still going to be pointing to the letters, but students are going to be saying it to themselves. And then I would say, okay, everyone, what's the word? Flash. Right, so now we're taking away some of these scaffolds. We're taking away some of the guidance so that students are internalizing the skill. And finally, we might get to the point where we say, okay, it's your turn. You're going to read this word the fast way. When I point to a word, sound it out to yourself. When I signal, say the word the fast way. Okay, ready? What word? That's right. This word is flash. So this kind of scaffolding of the right amount of practice might take place over, multiple weeks or multiple even months. But that the kind of practice opportunities, we're going to adjust the level of guidance or scaffolding based on where students are and how much they can do on their own and how much they can internalize. So we looked before and sort of saying that we would want to give kids guided practice going through each of the parts of this strategy, right? Your turn to circle the parts at the beginning of the word, and circle the parts at the end of the word, and then read each part, and then read the word. And that might be the just right amount of guidance when we're first learning the strategy. But then down the road, we might sort of say, all right, you know how to do this, so it's your turn. You're going to circle the parts at the beginning and the end of this word. Then you're going to read the parts and read the whole word. So before we said that this was a non-example because we weren't leading kids or guiding kids through each of the steps of this strategy. But at the same time, later on, we know that the students can do it with that level of guided practice, and we want to take away some of the guidance and some of the scaffolding to give kids opportunities to practice without that same level of support, so that they're doing more of this themselves. They're internalizing the strategy and being able to do it on their own. So again, we're sort of adjusting the right amount of guidance based on where students are. Okay, so the last feature of effective guided practice that we're going to be talking about is providing clear prompts and supports. And by providing prompts and different kinds of supports, what we're doing is we're sort of helping to build in scaffolding for students when they're in this phase of guided practice, right? So it's going to help them and help guide them through their practice opportunities to help them both kind of stay on task, can move through with other students, and to kind of help them really focus on the skill that we're practicing. So one of the things that we can do is we can provide visual or physical prompts when we're doing guided practice. So for example, a physical or visual prompt could be touching under different parts of words or letters that students are practicing. So it could be something like, when I touch, you say the sound. So we might go like something like this. When I touch, you say the sound. Ready? And the students would say E. And here I go. Ready? Ready? Ch. And this is one where we might change what the prompt is because this is a short sound or a stop sound, so we can't hold it out. We can't say cha. So we might sort of use a physical prompt where we just tap when we say ready, sound, right? Ch. Ready? Oi. So again, we're sort of using this kind of prompt both to sort of focus them on the example that they're practicing, and also if there's more than one student, it's kind of giving them a signal so that they can respond together, and it helps them all respond at the same time and they're not kind of chiming in. And also it kind of gives them some prompts about this is a long sound, so you can hold it out. It's a short sound, so you have to say it quickly. So we give visual prompts a lot of times when, say, we're working together with a group of students and they're looking at some kind of material that the teacher has, either on the board or on a chart or on a book that the students are looking at. If students are looking down at their own work on a paper on their desk or on some sort of book, then we want to give auditory prompts because students can't see what we're pointing at, but they can listen and hear what we're saying. So we might say something like, okay, you look at the letter combinations on your page, and when I signal, you say the sound. So I might say, ready, sound, E, sound, sound, ch, sound, oi. Right, so they know that the signal is, or the prompt is, when I say sound, they're all going to say the sound that they're looking at in their book. And sometimes we sort of have a ready, so we could say ready, sound, ready, sound. And that keeps students together so that they're maximizing opportunities to practice as a group or a small group while they're looking down at their book or at their list of sounds or words. Another thing that we can think about when we're talking about prompts and supports is how material supports help students during the guided practice phase. So you've seen before that we've been using these kind of 3 square strips or 2 square strips, Elkanon boxes, and this is helpful as a kind of graphic representation of how many sounds or how many letters are in a word. And you can sort of see how this type of material support can build through the kind of word reading skills that we're working on. So this could be used in a phonemic awareness activity like a segmenting activity. So we might say the sounds in the word sun and touch a square for each sound. So when students are working, they could be sort of touching each square when they say a sound. So they could say s, n. And that's helpful because that sort of shows them there's going to be 3 sounds in this word, and it kind of keeps them on track as they're saying the sounds. Sometimes you see for these kind of Elkanon boxes that you might move a marker into each box to represent each sound or each phoneme. Right, so that's providing this kind of support through materials that we really want at this initial stages of practice. We could use the same kind of Elkanon box then when we move into decoding or reading. So now they're familiar already with these 3 boxes. They know there's going to be 3 sounds, but now there's letters in there instead of just the sounds orally. Right? So touch under each letter and say its sound, then read the word. So this is a place where students then could touch under each sound, say each sound, and then read the word. And again, it's kind of giving them a prompt that there's going to be 3 sounds in this word that they're doing, and they're also used to this because they've been doing it with phonemic awareness. We could then move on to when we're doing whole word reading. We still have the three squares and the letters, but now we've put a sort of arrow under it, and it could be put your finger on the dot, and when I signal, read the whole word. So students might put their finger on the dot and then say, give them time to think about it, and then say, read the whole word, and then they could say mud. So they sort of get this support from the materials that they're going to sort of start at that end, and then they're going to read the whole word across while they slide their finger across the line. Right, so we see that there's these different kind of prompts that we're using and material supports that we're using to kind of help students during this guided practice. Okay, so here's one that I want you to take a minute to just sort of look at and see whether you think this is providing clear prompts and supports for students as they're reading this word. So I'm going to just give you a few seconds while you read this and see what you think. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this. So there's some subtle things in here where prompts and supports are used in a way that might not be as helpful for students. So I'm already going to tell you that this is probably a non-example of what we're talking about here. So the first thing, let's talk about the prompts. So we're saying you're going to sound out this word, and then we say ready, letter, and at that the students are supposed to be able to sound out the word. So what we want them to do here is go f, I, sh. But we're using the kind of prompt letter, which might be confusing the students because they could think that we're asking them to say F, I, S, H. And that's not what we want here. So the way the prompts are built in are okay, but the kind of prompt is probably misleading students into not being completely sure what we're asking them to do with the prompt. The next thing is sort of looking at whether we're using the kind of material supports in a way that's going to be helpful for students. So we have one letter in each box, and so we have F-I-S-H, fish. But when you think about it, we've been using these boxes to represent each sound. So in phonemic awareness, we talked about that if there's 3 sounds in a word, we would have 3 boxes. But here we have SH in each separate boxes, and really SH just makes one sound, sh. So you can't really go f, I, s, h, fish. That's not going to work, right? So we're using, these are effective material supports, but we're not really using them correctly because we have consonant digraph sh, which is 2 letters that make one sound, in 2 separate boxes, which is sort of providing the wrong kind of prompt and the wrong kind of support. I was going to mention one more thing about this. At the end, we say, what word did you read? And there isn't really a kind of prompt for if students or multiple students are doing this to kind of read that together. Okay, so here's an example that's you tried to fix some of those things. So this would be your turn. You're going to sound out this word. Ready? Sound. And when I'm going to say, I'm pausing, but I'm going to also say what the students are supposed to say. You're going to sound out this word. Ready? Sound. Sound. I. Sound. Sh. Word, fish, right? So the prompts are very clear and simple, but they're accurate, right? We want them to say the sound, and then read the whole word. We also see that we put the SH in the same box, which is appropriate because it's actually only one sound, so that the boxes still represent a sound, but we're saying that these 2 letters go together to make the same sound, to make one sound. So this is going to be a more accurate use of using prompts and supports. So this is a positive example. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be thinking about our checklist, and we're going to kind of combine both the checklist that we developed for thinking about effective models in word reading instruction and the checklist that we have been talking about for effective guided practice in word reading instruction. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video of a teacher teaching a lesson on reading irregular words. And we're going to play the video, and you can stop it and then go through the checklist in your workbook and see whether you think this example is showing these features of effective models and effective guided practice. You should feel free to kind of go back and rewatch the video multiple times just so you have a better sense and you can watch it and get a sense about these different features. The next piece is going to be viewing the video.
To give us nice job. Zoe is sitting up to the table. She's not talking. She doesn't have her hand on the post-it note, so she's ready to learn. My turn. Word do. Your turn. Word
do.
Spell do.
D-O.
Word
Do.
wait until I slide, which Heidi did a nice job of waiting until I slid. My turn. Word do. Your turn. Word
Do.
Spell do.
D-O.
Word
Do.
My turn. Word me. Your turn. Word
Me.
Spell me.
M-E.
Word
Me.
My turn. Word my. Your turn. Word
My.
Spell my.
M-Y.
Word
My.
My turn. Word for. Your turn. Word
For.
Spell for.
F-O-R.
Word Oh, such a nice job. Everybody responded right when I signaled. When I point to the left of the word, figure out the word in your head. When I slide my hand underneath the word, you'll read the word. My turn. Let me show you how. Word do. Word me. Your turn. Word
Do.
Oh, wait till I slide. Word
Do.
Wait till I slide. Word
Do.
Word
My.
My turn. Word me. Your turn. Word
Me.
Spell me.
M-E.
Word
Do.
Everybody say it together. Word
Do.
Wait till I slide. Word
Do.
Wait till I slide. Word
Do.
Word
Me.
Word
My.
Word
For.
Word
Fed.
Wait till I slide. Word
Fed.
Nice job, Zoe and Heidi, waiting until I slide. Word
Fed.
Word
Do.
Word
My.
Word
Me.
Word
Me.
Word
My.
Word
You.
Word
Do.
Word
You.
Word
Fed.
Word
For.
Word
My.
Oh my gosh, you guys all waited until I slid my hand. Individual turns. Word Heidi.
My.
Word Everybody better be ready to read the word. Word Taya.
Me.
Good. Word Zoe.
You.
Oh, good job.
Okay, so you all got a chance to watch this video of a lesson focusing on teaching irregular words. These are words that kids can't sound out because they don't kind of follow regular, predictable phonics relationships, so they're having to memorize the words or spell them out letter by letter. And as you watched the video, you were looking at the checklist for effective models and effective guided practice. If you want, feel free to kind of go back and watch the video a couple of different times if you want to just review and make sure that you got a chance to see it and think about all the different features that we've been talking about. So now we're going to watch it together, and I'm going to stop the video in a couple places and just talk about what we're seeing and what you might have written down when you were thinking about the features of modeling and practice.
Ready?
To give us
Nice job. Zoe is sitting up to the table. She's not talking. She doesn't have her hand on the post-it note, so she's ready to learn. My turn. Word do. Your turn. Word
Do.
Spell do.
D-O.
Word
Do.
wait until I slide, which Heidi did a nice job of waiting until I slid. My turn. Word do. Your turn. Word
Do.
spell do.
D-O.
Word
Do.
my turn. Word me. Your turn. Word
Me.
spell me.
M-E.
Word
Me.
my turn. Word my. Your turn. Word
My.
spell my.
M-I.
Word
My.
my turn. Word for. Your turn. Word
For.
spell for.
F-O-R.
Word
For.
oh, such a nice job. Everybody responded right when I signaled.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the modeling component. So that was generally the part of the lesson where she was modeling what was going on. So let's just talk really quickly about our the different features that we've been talking about for effective models. So one is focusing on a singular objective. So we can see here that the goal of this lesson is to really introduce these 5 irregular words so that students get the chance to hear and learn and practice these 5 words. So we can pretty much think about that as that's a pretty clear objective. Explain with clear, consistent, and concise language. She uses very similar language to talk about these words. When she signals and she's explaining, she's basically talking about the word, what it is, what the letters are. So that's pretty straightforward. The next one is model, demonstrate the skill or strategy. So she goes through and says, my turn, and then reads each word first to tell the word to the students before they're asked to say the word after that. One of the things that's sort of interesting is she doesn't spell the word so much. She asks the students to spell the word. So that could be a place where if we weren't sure if students were able to do that or understanding what that is, we might sort of say, my turn, the word is for, spell it F-O-R. So she could have maybe modeled that step if that was something that she thought was necessary. Students are pretty good at it, so it seems like maybe they don't really need that level of support and that they're able to do that. She models all the examples of the words that students are asked to read later, and she models multiple times. So it seems like to me that for the most part we see some effective modeling going on here at the beginning of this lesson. Okay, so now we're going to watch the rest of the lesson and focus on guided practice. And before we go back, I also want to say that here's an example that even during the modeling phase of this lesson, we still see that the students are practicing too. So every time she models something, right afterwards, she gives students practice on the same word that she just modeled. So we see this is one of those examples where the modeling and the practice really are kind of integrated with this type of a lesson. So it's not like just modeling and then moving on to practice. There's that kind of cycle of modeling and practice that we see in this very brief modeling component of this lesson. Okay, so let's go on and watch the rest of the lesson again.
When I point to the left of the word, figure out the word in your head. When I slide my hand underneath the word, you'll read the word. My turn. Let me show you how. Word, do. Word, me. Your turn. Word.
Do.
Oh, wait till I slide. Word.
Do.
Wait till I slide. Word.
Do.
Word.
My.
My turn. Word, me. Your turn. Word.
Me.
Spell me.
M-E.
Word. Word.
Do.
Everybody say it together. Word.
Do.
Wait till I slide. Word.
Do.
Wait till I slide. Word.
Do.
Word.
Me.
Word.
My.
Word.
For.
Word.
Said.
Oh, wait till I slide. Word.
Said.
Nice job, Zoe and Heidi, waiting until I slide. Word.
Said.
Word.
Do.
Word.
My.
Word.
Me.
Word.
Me.
Word.
My.
Word.
You.
Word.
Do.
Word.
You.
Word.
Said.
Word.
For.
Word.
My.
Oh my gosh, you guys all waited until I slid my hand. Individual turns. Word. Heidi.
My.
Word. Everybody better be ready to read the word. Word. Taya.
Me.
Good. Word.
K.
Zoe.
My. You.
Oh, good job.
Okay, let's talk about the practice component of this lesson. So she is, again, teaching a regular word reading, and let's look at our features. So the first one is focus on the same singular objective using similar examples. Well, this one's pretty straightforward, right? She's practicing, giving students practice on the exact same words that she introduced during the modeling, the same sort of 5 irregular words that she introduced. They're not necessarily practicing the component where they're sort of saying the letters of the word, they're just reading the whole word. So that could be something that, there could be a practice component where it's sort of decided that it was important that they practice that component of spelling the words. In this part, they're not doing that. They're just reading the whole word. Guiding students through the skill and strategy. She's not sort of saying, okay, go ahead and practice these words on your own or practice the words in a line. She's really guiding them. She gives them guidance on every single practice opportunity that they get. So there isn't really steps of this strategy. It's basically just reading the word. But she very carefully guides them through practicing each of the words word by word. The next one is provide just right amount of guidance based on students' needs. So again here, it seems like she's made a couple of decisions, or this lesson was written with a couple of decisions. One is that students are introduced to kind of 5 new words, and that's the number that seems the sort of just right amount of practice that they're practicing these 5 new words. One of the things that you could see maybe in another lesson is that adding those 5 new words into a list of other words that they've already learned as a regular word. So that would be a place where you could adjust that. It's also that they're reading the whole word. They're not necessarily stopping to spell the word letter by letter. So that's another kind of decision that was made around the kind of just right amount of guidance in practice. But they've also the decision that they're practicing these new words multiple times each, and that they're guiding students through each of the words word by word. So it's kind of hard to tell about that, but those are the things that we can at least think about in terms of at what level of guidance is provided in this particular lesson. So what about clear prompts and supports? It seems like this is a pretty big focus of what she's trying to do in this lesson, which is using very consistent prompts, right? She says word, and then she slides. So the word is a kind of place where the students are supposed to get ready, and then when she slides, students are supposed to say the whole word. And so she's trying to use those prompts pretty consistently. And because the students are looking up at her, she's using sort of visual prompts with her finger, but she's also using auditory prompts by saying word, and then she slides. So this is a piece here where she's really working hard at helping these students reply together. And they're not so great at it, right? They need some work on it. So she's really going back and giving them extra time and practicing again. And if she doesn't hear them all doing it at the same time, she goes back. So clearly this is something that she's working on with them. And the reason why this is so important is that when you're trying to do group responses in a practice opportunity, it really only works if everyone is responding together. And so then you can tell that one student's not listening to another student, and that they're doing this in a kind of efficient way. And one of the things about that is you can see by the end, the students are really have kind of got it, right? They're all reading the words together based on her signaling, which she's doing pretty consistently. Finally, at the end, you see that she gives some individual kid responses. And one of the things you can see there, she doesn't say ahead of time who's going to get their response. She sort of points to the word and says word, and so that everybody is ready to respond. And then she calls on an individual student so that everybody is kind of ready to respond if called on. And so that's, in a sense, kind of maximizing the effectiveness of those kind of individual responses. So for this lesson, I would say that for the most part, we see a pretty good example of these features of effective modeling and effective guided practice. That being said, you may have found some things in here that you thought may not have followed it. And no lesson is perfect, so that doesn't mean that there aren't places in here where it could be improved, or you may have seen something that you didn't feel like was the best example of some of these features, and that's perfectly fine. One of the goals of these modules is for you to really become much more of an informed kind of consumer of these types of lessons and word reading instruction. So it's good to really be picking it apart and thinking about what are the things that you see and what are some things that could be improved. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a different kind of example. And this activity is going to be evaluating a lesson. So I'm going to have you read this lesson. This is a lesson for teaching open syllables. And this lesson is in your workbook. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. You can stop the video and take a minute and read through this lesson in your workbook, and again do the same thing, sort of evaluate it based on these features of effective models and effective guided practice. And then when we come back together, we'll go through the lesson and evaluate it. The other thing that you should do is when you're doing this, think about how you might revise this lesson or rewrite this lesson so that it better follows these features of effective models or effective guided practice. If this is the lesson you were using and you knew that students weren't responding, or you had a sense that students might not respond to this, how would you do these qualitative adaptations to this lesson to make it more effective, more intensive, better meeting the needs of the students you're working with? Okay, so stop the video and take a few minutes and evaluate and think about how to adapt this lesson. Okay, welcome back. At this point, you should have had an opportunity to read through this lesson and to think about whether it meets these features of effective modeling and guided practice. One kind of interesting note is when I was going to write a lesson for you to evaluate, I was going to try to write one that didn't necessarily meet all these features, and I was just going to go online to find an example of a lesson for teaching open syllables that I could then rewrite to make it not so great. But actually, this lesson was one of the first ones that came up in my search, and when I read it, I said, well, this is pretty bad already. So I didn't have to do much to make this a non-example of some of these principles. So it's sort of an example of that the kinds of resources out there that sometimes teachers are looking for are not necessarily going to be good, positive examples of what good modeling and practice looks like. All right, so let's go through this and kind of talk about it a little bit. So in the modeling section, what are we looking for? Focusing on a singular objective. So we sort of see in the title that the objective here is teaching open syllables. We don't have a whole lot of information about what exactly we're talking about, what open syllables we're talking about. And one of the hints in here that when you look through it is you see that there's some of these words at the beginning here like me, hi, no, she. These are open syllables, but they're also standalone words, right? So these are one syllable words that happen to kind of follow the pattern of open syllables. And then we look down here and we see that there are some other words that are involved in this lesson too. Tiger, lady, secret. These are two-syllable words, and the open syllables in each of these words, tie, lay, and see, aren't words by themselves. So it's a little bit unclear here exactly what the objective is. Is it to be able to identify real words that are also open syllables? Is it reading single syllable open syllables? Is it being able to read two-syllable words that begin with an open syllable? So it's a little unclear exactly what the objective is. And if it's unclear, it probably isn't really focused on a singular objective. So I would say that this is one that's a little unclear exactly what it's supposed to be teaching. All right, explain with clear and concise and consistent language. So we have an example here of this is really the heart of what's happening here in this lesson, right? We're defining open syllables for students, and what we're saying is an open syllable ends in a vowel and the sound is long. So that actually is a pretty clear description of what an open syllable is, right? It ends in a vowel, and when we see a syllable that ends in a vowel, we know that that vowel is going to make the long sound. So I would say that this is a fairly clear description of defining what an open syllable is. On the other hand, we have all this stuff at the beginning. And when you kind of read through this all, I had to read through it multiple times to kind of figure out what it is that the teacher is supposed to be doing and what the students are supposed to be doing. There's all these things where we're saying, look at these words, how many vowels do you see? And then they're sort of having to read these words ahead of time. So, and then we're asking, well, what are you doing? How's your mouth look? What should we call these kinds of things? What are good name? And so in a sense, to me, this feels like very sort of vague, confusing language at the introduction of this lesson. And in a sense, you sort of see what's going on, right? It's trying to kind of introduce students to the topic, to kind of bring in some background knowledge, to kind of orient them to what and engage them into this task. But to me, especially for kids that are experiencing reading difficulties and intensive learning needs, this feels like this part of the lesson would be confusing and not really focused in on the goal of the lesson, which is being able to read open syllables. Okay, model, demonstrate the skill or strategy. Couldn't find it. Doesn't seem to me that there's any place where the teacher models reading open syllables before asking the students to do it. Right? It starts off right at the beginning with asking students to read open syllables, and then it ends with asking students to read open syllables in two-syllable words. So there's no place in this lesson that I could find where the teacher is saying, I'll show you how to read an open syllable. Watch me do it. And in a sense, if we're thinking about modeling and we're thinking about appropriate examples to model and modeling additional examples, we're just really modeling at all. So we don't see those criteria. So this is an example of a lesson that really does not have a very strong modeling component in there. All right, so let's talk about guided practice. Focus on the same singular objective using similar examples. So again, it's all about open syllables, but for a clear objective and for modeling and practice, we need to be a little more specific about that. So again, this is in the modeling piece, and even though there isn't modeling, the kind of examples that are used in the beginning of the lesson, me, hi, no, and she, are very different than the examples that are down below that the students are supposed to be practicing. Right? So there's a mismatch between the examples and the objective that the lesson starts with and the examples and the skill that the students are supposed to be practicing at the end of the lesson. So this is a really good non-example of consistency between the introduction and the modeling and then the practice. Guide students through the skill or strategy. Again, we have a strategy, right? An open syllable ends in a vowel and the sound is long. So what we'd be looking for here in practice is sort of leading and guiding the students through using this strategy, using this description of the skill to then figure out how to practice reading these words. So we don't see the teacher guiding students through saying things like, let's look at this syllable. Does it end in a vowel? That means the sound is long. What's the sound? What's the word? So you don't see them leading through this process of students identifying a syllable as an open syllable and then reading the syllable with a long vowel. So we're not seeing that kind of guiding going on through the skill and strategy during the guided practice part. We do see down here, it says, help students blend each syllable to read the words, talk about what they are hearing. So this is the kind of direction for how the teacher is supposed to support students during the guided practice. And this is really unclear to me. It's hard to know what this means. And again, we're sort of reading words that are different than what we were talking about at the very beginning of the lesson. The next is provide just right amount of guidance based on student skills. Again, this kind of matches this. Is this at the right place for where students are? And we don't know for sure, but my guess is that this is not set up in a way for students to be successful based on what they're bringing into the lesson. And finally, provide clear prompts and supports. We do have a prompt or a support in here. There's going to be this on the board. The students are supposed to complete it themselves, but it really is a kind of reminder of what you do when you read an open syllable. An open syllable ends in a vowel, and the vowel sound is long. So we could think about this as probably a support, some sort of scaffold. If that was on the board or a student had access to that, that would be something that they could refer to help them make sure that they're following the steps and understanding what the criteria is for a long vowel sound in an open syllable. However, we don't see any sort of kind of direction for teachers on how to prompt reading these words, how to lead them through it. So it's a little confusing about when they get to this practice. We don't know if these are words that students have in a book that's going to be on the board, that they're doing it out loud together as group responses. Are they doing this individually? So there isn't a lot of direction about how we're prompting students as they're practicing in the second part of this lesson. Okay, so let's take a look at a revised lesson. And in this revised lesson, first, I will say that this is not a perfect lesson, and that I tried to use pretty much the same format and the same type of language that's being used, but try to adapt it so that it includes more of those principles of effective instruction that we talked about. So the same thing, directions for teaching open syllables. One of the things I think is important for these kind of lessons is to think about what are the skills that students already need to have before they do this lesson. So I wrote this or revised this so that I'm assuming that students already know the difference between long and short vowels. So if you showed them the vowel A, they could say the short sound is A and the long sound is A. So they're already able and they've already mastered that skill. I'm also assuming that they already know how to read closed syllables. So these are syllables that end with a consonant and the vowel is a short sound. So that if they see a closed syllable, that they're going to be able to read that. And the new information that's getting introduced in this lesson is going to be how to read and identify open syllables. So here's how I revised it. First, I started right off with the key objective, which is being able to identify and read open syllables by defining it. So define open syllables to students, and what we're going to say is the same wording from the first lesson. An open syllable ends in a vowel and the sound is long. So that's going to be, we're still going to use that as a definition of what an open syllable is. Then we're going to write the following syllables on the board, me, tie, mel, and low. And then there's a process for modeling reading these syllables. So give some suggested wording to say this syllable ends in a vowel, so it is an open syllable. The vowel says blank, the syllable is blank. So for example, we might do for this, we would say, all right, so this syllable ends in a vowel. So it is an open syllable. The vowel says I, so the syllable is tie. Okay, and then this one here, this syllable doesn't end in a vowel, so it isn't an open syllable. This closed syllable is mel. So we'd go through and model that sort of process for each of the words that's up there. So me, tie, mel, and low. And then there's a practice opportunity for students to practice these same words that these same syllables that we just modeled a few minutes ago. So it's your turn to read these syllables, and then we would guide through step by step. So the wording would be something like this. Okay, now it's your turn. Does this syllable end with a vowel? Students should say yes. So you say vowel, I, syllable, tie. So I'm giving them sort of ready signal, which is I say vowel, and then when I point, they're going to say the vowel, and then I'm going to say syllable, and then when I slash, they're going to read the syllable. So again, it would be, okay, let's look at this word. This syllable, does this syllable end with a vowel? Yes. Vowel, I, syllable, tie. And for this one, we would go, does this syllable end in a vowel? No. So then I would say syllable, mel. So again, I'm assuming that they can read those closed syllables without kind of going through and talking about that it's a short vowel. Okay, so then number 4, practice. These are practice reading the following syllables with the same procedure. So there's a number of syllables, so a range of examples, some with different vowels, but there's also some closed syllables in that list, so that it's not just always going to be a closed syllable. Sometimes it's going to be not always an open syllable, sometimes a closed syllable. So lo, fi, tag, be, re, te, reb, by, ro, lib, may. And that last one, I'm not quite sure. Maybe pon, might be pon. The other thing that I did here is I chose all syllables that aren't real words, but that would be parts of words that you would see in polysyllabic words. Maybe me at the beginning is a real word, but for the most part, these are going to be syllables that you're going to see in multisyllabic words, not necessarily standalone one syllable closed or open syllables. So this may look different than your way that you are thinking that you would revise it. And again, there's lots of ways to revise or adapt this lesson. But again, the main things we want to do is really see that we can include these features of effective models and the features of effective guided practice based on what we've been talking about. Okay, thank you very much. This is the end of part 2. And part 3 will focus on some of the supporting practices that go along with our explicit instruction model. Things like opportunities to respond, giving immediate corrective feedback, and making sure that we're using fast and appropriate pacing. Thank you.